Sometimes I grind my Excel sheets. Sometimes pour cold.
Alright. I don't know why I have to spend so much time every year explaining how to argue against me. Like, this is how you get around me. Like, I'm an obstacle to defeat instead of just a guy trying to get more right so he can win a tiny little fantasy football game. You can't say the numbers aren't the numbers. I'm too funny. Like, I don't say a lot of good things about myself, but I am a sarcastic... I will dance around that argument, and I will have so much fun and meme so hard that you'll eventually block me, and I'll have a time of my life. Like, you can't say the numbers aren't the numbers. It's too easy. I know, everyone's doing prospect work right now, and we're starting at the top of the list. This is my favorite wide receiver ever. We're doing it different, okay? Because believe it or not, I actually spend most of my time looking at the players that you liked that I said were bad and didn't work out. That's what I spend my time doing. I also spend more time looking at the players that didn't look great production-wise and then turned out to be good. All 7 of them, 3 of them played running back, 2 of them played quarterback. I spent a lot of time looking at those players, especially Michael Thomas and Terry McLaurin, the 2 wide receivers in that group, Brandon Marshall. I spent a lot of time trying to find what extra information I can wring out of the outliers to good players are good in college. That's actually where I spend the majority of my time outside of sorting and organizing spreadsheets. I know the exceptions you need to know if you want to come at me with Terrence Marshall as a top 5 running wide receiver this year. You'd be better off just asking me than trying to... I'm not trying to be toxic. I'm not, but you can't... Let me show you. Let me show you some things, okay? I'll show you how Terrence Marshall might be good. That I've spent more time looking at Marshall than any other player so far. Marshall, Jalen Waddle, all the ones with lower production. But you can't start with he actually was productive because they were not. You're looking for... They were not. Okay, they're just not. It's like... We can argue whether the sky is a different color, sure, but I'm going to be having fun with it, not actually having a debate. Not actually trying to find information about this player. Like, alright. So, I make these little graphs, right? You don't like them, obviously, because I don't like Terrence Marshall that much, so I deserve not to have anything I do liked. I get it. But, I make these, and they're a chore and a half to make, and I do it because they've been a fairly good, over the years, physical representation of an overall profile. Not perfect. We'll show some examples. That's what we're going to do. Ready? But this isn't what I really want to show you. What I'm going to show you is this. Zeno at the dude Z. Change it. Zeno. Actual wizard. Actually someone who is mathematically and coding inclined. Not a fake nerd like me. Made this for you all. It's also on DLF. He's got a lot of apps over there as well. And ZenoIsMyName.com. You can select the player. You can choose the graph that it makes on any metric you want, and you don't have to fool around with Excel like me. True, it's not funny colors and fancy colors like the ones I made, but it does the same job. Okay, so if you want to make a graph, ZenoIsMy.name. That's funny, Zeno. I get it now. And you can make any graph you want. Look at dominating, look at market share receiving yards, which is the one I just had up, and trying to find information or make graphs that way. I prefer this way because I like pretty colors. Okay, so let me get my big old ugly face out of the way here. This, I think, is a pretty good representation of the way Terrence Marshall's career went. The dots, or the blue dots behind his numbers there, those are quote-unquote good players. They're pretty much every player to have a wide receiver 3 season with 150 PPR points since 2008. Now, Zeno's average line is based on players with top 24 seasons. I make those too sometimes. This is a lot lower threshold. You know what happens, interesting enough, if I up from 150 PPR points to players with top 24 seasons, so better players, the line moves up pretty much consistently over every metric you look at. If you raise the threshold of what you're aiming for, the players are increasingly productive. Now, it's not exponential. Eventually, it peters out. You're not going to keep increasing that bar and find out, like, you know, the Antonio Browns in the world are all up there in the 40s and 50s. It does peter out. But if you move from wide receiver 3 to wide receiver top 24 seasons, it goes up. I'm just saying that there's players who are productive are more likely to be good. I think that's pretty much obvious. In fact, when I lay this out for people that haven't engaged with me in this argument over their favorite player before, they're like, well, yeah, but wait until your favorite player doesn't cross this line, and suddenly there's a whole bunch of excuses. Terrence Marshall had 23% market share receiving yards in his final season. That's average. That's good. That's what most seniors do. Most seniors who are good going into the NFL are slightly over that line in their last season. That red line is where the average of them is, and as you can see from the dots behind them, most of them are higher than that, even at an age 20 season. Now, the first bad argument that gets thrown at me is per game, bruh. Through the first seven games, he was killing it and then got injured. And I can't judge a player for the games he didn't play, which is why my metrics and models, I just throw that season out and I'm using these other two, which is why it doesn't like him. But he played with great players. Round 2, already down one premise, per game does not help. By the way, if you adjust players per game, all players, it lowers the signal, is a nerdy way of putting it. Or in other words, you think worse players are better and better players are worse. So the only reason that you want to use it is to make an individual case for why this player is good. But here's the thing, you don't know which ones are going to be good, so you're just applying it at random because you want this player to cross the threshold. Throw that out. You can't say he's over the line when he's under the line, because Rashad Bateman, one of the most productive players at age 18 and someone I'm high on this year, is below the line the second 2 years because he played lower games because he was injured. I don't say he was above the line on those 2 years or go per game because I want to fit it. The reason I like him is because age 18 is actually one of the most significant indicators you can have based on past prospects, and that means that I think if he continued to play, he would have been above the line those other 2 seasons as well, or enough close to the line that he would compare well to past prospects who have been good. Terrence Marshall played 2 seasons fully and was drastically underwhelming compared to good players. And then 1 year where even if you go per game, his dominator, I believe, goes up to like 33%, which is still below the line. Per game doesn't help, even if it helps. It doesn't. But second part of already bad argument, but the second part of it is he played with good players. Now that, having spent a lot of time stressing over why some good players are bad, I've looked at that a lot. Now it starts on a false premise that players can be held back by other good players. Here's the thing. Who is that player? I'll wait. I will sit here and I'll wait for not really, because I have to get this video out in under 20 minutes at least. But I will be sitting here waiting for the rest of time, or until it happens, because it can happen. It could be a thing, because we've seen it happen in the NFL. It makes logical sense. It could happen. But there is no player who is good in the NFL who in college had low production because he had whoever in front of him. Like, he was playing behind Calvin Johnson. That's why his production looks low. That's not happened before. In fact, the few times we've seen players who are good in the NFL play together in the same college teams of the same years, they were also good. They were over this line. Not always. This line isn't like the answer, but pretty much all the stats, all the adjusted stats, the market share, that's why I'm showing these graphs just as an inroad to a overall picture. If you dig into numbers, you can find, and that's where we're coming to, promise, you can find reasons to adjust this up. Why? Because I want to know if Terrence Marshall is good. So I have looked a lot, and maybe I can find you a better path than pretending the numbers are more than they are. Because they're not more than they are. So, alright. There are exceptions. That's the argument I'll throw out when people try to make those adjustments. 1, it's random. 2, the premise is wrong. 3, there are no good examples. But there are examples that we can use to try and understand what we might see if Terrence Marshall is good, if Jalen Waddle is good. So we can't compare them directly to good players because they just don't compare well. So we're looking for some reason. Terrence Marshall was injured that last year. We didn't get to see it play out. Are there examples of good players that only have good last years and mediocre to poor early? Yes. There are a couple, actually. Now, some of them are outside of my data set, so I can't see their early careers, which is really frustrating. Some of them played in a lower conference and elevated, so we don't know. But the few that I have been able to scratch up the stats for, like Kenny Golladay, were still well above this line because they were great players playing in lower conferences. But there were a few, like, name literally just jumped out my head. Played for Tampa Bay. Just jumped out my head, but he doesn't count anyway because I can't get a hold of his stats and put them in the database, and he played a couple of years even at that conference level, like before 2000, so we can't really compare them to players within the database. But there was one recently. There are a few others that I've used to build on this. If you just have one example of something that's kind of nutsy, right? Outside of Ohio, which is, as far as I can tell, the only reason Michael Thomas and Terry McLaurin are under this line consistently in all of their years, Ohio seems to be the reason. And if you're a fan of the Ohio college team, we can live together. I'm not saying they may be the best team in the world, but I've got some questions about the way they utilize their wide receiver talent. That's all I'm saying. And that's the only instance of it. None of them broke the line. Neither of them broke the line. They were pretty close to it, and they both come from the same Ohio team in the same era. But there are players who suffered injuries or through contextual issues playing with good talent that turned out to be good in the NFL. And it happened relatively recently. I bet you know who I'm thinking about. So this fella, it's DK Metcalf. Alright, so DK Metcalf played with AJ Brown and DeMarcus Lodge, who, believe it or not, is a better comparison for Terrence Marshall, which is kind of why I'm leaning towards no. Despite plowing through it, and despite a lot of people telling me he looks great, but we'll get there. DK Metcalf never crosses this line, you'll note. Let me get my big fat face out the way again. Peter, man, DK Metcalf's amazing, never crossed this line. But we had this debate out, and because I actually listen, and I'm actually trying not to, I don't want analytics to win, and I'm doing bunny rabbit ears. That's how emphatic I am about this conversation, because I hate air punctuation. I don't care if the analytics showed me. I just want to get it right. So I had this conversation with Jake and everyone else in 2019 when he got drafted. And there was a lot of contextual information to this line, to this image of DK Metcalf's production that told me that this isn't the full picture of what he is. Especially the fact that age 19, why is that his best season? Well, there's a lot of injuries. He's switching in and out with AJ Brown, right? In fact, it seems to be the injuries, not AJ Brown. Now, the best comparison I have for you, good players playing on the same team, are two of the most productive players in the NFL, especially through the early part of the career, played on the same team in college. Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry. Now, Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry, when you put them on the same graph, look like this. That's what normally happens. It's what normally happens in the NFL. Think Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson, or Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen, for that matter. They're both good, so the ancillary players suffer. Even in college, that seems to be the truth. So that there is other talent isn't why I'm interested in Terrence Marshall, or isn't the reason I would say that his line is low, because frankly, whenever we do see it and they're not injured, this happens. Now, it happens relatively rarely that great NFL players play on the same team in the same years. Frankly, These aren't missed. Remember, this is organized by age, not career year, and so they're actually slightly misaligned. But on the same team in the same year, both Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham were well above this age line, and significantly throughout their whole. They show up really well. In fact, they might be a little muted by each other, but they were still easily able to outcompete the rest of the competition. That they show up as incredibly productive. All right, so that's what we understand about there being other talent. Now we go back to the AJ Brown and DK Metcalf debate, because AJ Brown was over that crappy little line, as if it matters that much. It's just a pictorial representation, again, of some of their college statistics, right? Specifically the market share receiving yards. So he was over the year. So I was pretty comfortable with AJ Brown just looking at this very simplistic image, but I have a lot of questions about DK Metcalf. So we had this debate out, and you can go listen to the podcast or any of the other podcasts or YouTube videos that I was on debating it. Now, if we dig in, which we should always do, and I do, believe it or not, dig in, especially to players with profiles that I don't like. That's where I spend most of my time. It's really cool that Laquan Treadwell shows up here. He makes a really great benchmark for how being the one isn't the thing. You have to be good as the one, not just be the largest percentage. But anyway, if we dig through the history of the team, this is what we see. So we go to 2016, we see AJ Brown have his first year at age 19, which is exactly what DK Metcalf did. But you see that he breaks out, or doesn't break out, but he breaks onto the team, as it were, in 2016 for 10% of the market share receiving yards, only 7% of the touchdowns, and 9% dominator, which isn't particularly impressive at 19. That's the dot that's below the line, right? But that's his first season at age 19. It's always nice to see more, but it's fine. I mean, most players, that's why it's important, don't do phenomenally great in their first few seasons. It tends to be a very positive line. It's also worth noting he had competition that year as well. Evan Ingram's actually on the team and has the highest dominator rating for a receiving skill position. There's a lot of stuff to break down that we could go through the overall production, breaking it down by year, and I'm really just trying to cut to the quick here, so I really recommend looking through it all. And Terrence Marshall, context is key, and we can get context on their numbers, not just their performance on tape. So, AJ Brown has competition, but he still breaks in, first year on the team for 10% market share receiving yards. It's not bad for a first year. It's actually pretty good. And the average for, as we saw on that graph, is around 15%, but 10%, it's within range of the fallacy of the average. Notice DeMarcus Lodge is also on the team that year, and I think that's his first year as well. And he comes in for 5%, which is, virtually nothing. Second year in, AJ Brown becomes a dominant wide receiver with DeMarcus Lodge filling up the second spot with a 21% dominant. And DK Metcalf has his first season on that line, at age 19, for a 20% dominator, 25% of the receiving touchdowns, which is pretty impressive, and 16% of the market share receiving yards. So that's where he gets close to it. Age 19, that's now below the average on that graph, because remember, 15% is the average for 18-year-olds, and it's slightly higher for 19-year-olds, but 16%, as you saw on the graph, is close enough to it that I was interested in. Now, the important point here is that he did break out. He got to a 20% dominator rating, which was the first point, and he has an actual breakout age. So even playing the third player on the team, he got 20% of the team's receiving usage in his first year. That's the first, right? That's just the first. His graph really doesn't describe that. All right. Follow on to the next year, their final year playing together, and DK Metcalf only plays 7 games. Don't per game it. You don't have to. He's already had a good season, and it doesn't show up on that simplistic picture that I was putting up. He has a breakout age, so it's not telling the full story. But also notice that he's playing the third fiddle, despite only playing 7 games and getting 13% of the receiving yards. Now, people were able to talk me around to the skill he was playing on tape, specifically Jake Anderson, who was on him from day one, to believe that his age 19 season was the truth, and he did break out. Now, that seems arbitrary, crossing the 20% threshold, but again, Thresholds are there for a reason, and I'm willing to say if you get in and around a threshold, that's okay. The fallacy of the average says you don't have to be over it. You don't have to be particularly close to it, but you have to be within range and have ancillary reasons to believe in him. DK Metcalf has some of those. Then he got draft capital, and it went to a team that wanted to use him and so on and so forth. And so it was fairly easy to come in on DK Metcalf. Now, Terrence Marshall actually has a tougher road, ignoring DJ Chark, obviously. But again, it's a pretty good benchmark for how good, or being the dominant wide receiver on a team, or receiving option, if it's Evan Ingram, isn't the thing. Getting to a 25% dominator is okay. DJ Chark's profile looked okay overall, but he's age 20, and 25% isn't that impressive at age 20 when compared to past players. That's the whole process here. But anyway, Terrence Marshall was competing with Justin Jefferson, okay, and Jamar Chase, who's probably, well, he definitely is the best wide receiver prospect in this year's class. I'll accept there's ancillary talent, but given the fact that we've looked not just at this team to try to prove that Terrence Marshall is good, but gotten a background understanding of what good players typically do when they're on the field together, Odell Beckham, Lamar Jackson, or even, Jarvis Landry, or A.J. Brown and DK Metcalf, we see that they can both excel and get closer and over those threshold numbers on the same team at the same time. Again, think Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. Think Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs. Good players can help each other, and it's more about pushing other ancillary talent out of the way. It's the same in college as it is in the NFL. So, the first year that Terrence Marshall plays, he's 18, which is nice to have an age 18 season to judge him on. Not judge him in, but you know what I mean. Justin Jefferson is the dominant force, Jamar Chase is second. Notice that Jamar Chase is playing in his first season. So that's what the first inclination you have, that Jamar Chase is a bit of a different animal. Age 18, he came in as the second highest dominating or producing wide receiver on this team. At 18 as a freshman, that's impressive, but we're not talking about Jamar Chase right now. Terrence Marshall doesn't. But again, as I said before, that's fine. You'd not expect it to walk on the field and be dominant. Not every good player was the best player on their team the first year, or the second best, like Jamar Chase was here. And you can see the coalition of talent here. Okay, but again, we're not going to adjust him for the talent that's on the team. We're going to adjust him for what he does in that situation. Now we go down a little bit to 2019, and Jamar Chase with Justin Jefferson becomes the second. This was the black mark on Justin Jefferson's profile. He was the 2, but you can see he's got a 27% dominator at age 20, which is above what DJ Chark was doing as the lone dominant wide receiver in his last year at age 20. When you compare it to what past players have done, Justin Jefferson, especially when you look at his whole career, was incredibly impressive. Jamar Chase puts another tick box in the, wow, this is a different kind of animal. Age 19, he dominates not just as the number 1 wide receiver on his team, but over Justin Jefferson, who we definitely know is good, having only seen him do it in literally 1 season as a rookie. That's impressive for Jamar Chase, and shouldn't have discounted him for some people as it did Justin Jefferson, because his numbers broadly good. This is what good players do when they're on the same team. And oh look, Terrence Marshall becomes number 3, much like DK Metcalf. Alright, this is a good route to arguing that Terrence Marshall is actually good. He did become the 3 in his second season at age 19. Now the problem with it is his numbers still don't compare. Notice that his market share of receiving yards, which has more signal than his touchdowns, is less than DK Metcalf did when he played 7 games. But he did become the 3. He's not like Stephen Sullivan or Derek Dillon. This is the next option on the team with 2 dominant players. But we're going to see what he does when he doesn't have either of those players on the team, and it's pretty much what DJ Chark did. 32% dominator as opposed to 25% dominator at age 20 is better than DJ Chark, but he wasn't able to distance himself the way Jamar Jefferson or Justin Jefferson was. Look, I'm not saying this isn't a good season. This is. I'm concerned with how much of it comes from the touchdown game, because like with the NFL game, we know that college touchdowns are also kind of subject to variance. And the most worrying part for me is in his best season, you're probably going to tell me that Keyshawn Bottle here is like the next best wide receiver to ever play the game. And probably this team seems to rack them up I'm willing to believe that because this is Bottle or however you say his name's first season. But notice that he also gets 23% of the receiving yards. That compares better to what Jamar Chase did in his first season, 10%, or Justin Jefferson did in his first season, which is, I'm losing track of myself. Age 19, that was the same first season, damn it, 29%. So, last year, the guy who's impressive, depending on his age so I can compare him, but as a freshman, is actually Buttle, whereas Terrence Marshall, that's a dominant, that's a high dominator, but it's largely based on touchdowns, not receiving yards. And again, I don't just prospect through market share or through receiving yards. I've looked at their actual numbers. I've adjusted them for conference. I've looked at their per attempt numbers, not just the per game numbers. And this is kind of the story throughout Terrence Marshall's profile. It's not that this last year wasn't good, but we have concerns that it's touchdowns. It's not that this last year isn't good, but these numbers aren't particularly good when you compare them to past prospects in their final year at the most advanced age or at the oldest age with physically developed as they're going to be in college. It's okay. And even if we go for per game, and yes, he played 7 games, then what it does is it jumps up to the average line, not over it. So I can see that you could make some loose comparisons to DK Metcalf's age 19 season. It's not his fault. But remember that he got injured his final season, not his second season, for example. But DK Metcalf was putting up that best season at 19 with AJ Brown on the field. That's not a fair comparison in my mind to Terrence Marshall playing without Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase. That's the name, right? Yeah. In his last season. So is there a reason to believe that? Well, yes, because people are watching him play and telling me he's good, and they're not lying. He's obviously got skill, and just as an underline to all of this, realize that this is all in context of the most remarkable players to ever play the game, successful NFL prospects. To do what Terrence Marshall has done is phenomenal. He's like, I've never done anything as amazing as be this good at anything. So Terrence Marshall is definitely a good player. You don't get here. You don't get on this team, and you don't get a 32% dominator without being pretty good at football. This is within the context of the unicorns of those who go on to be good in the NFL. He does not compare well to past prospects, but you can make an argument that his last year was good. But even then, when you compare him to the very limited sample of players we have who were injured or suffered some other kind of issue that meant that they were limited, not that there was excessive talent, but that they were limited in the season where they were doing well, there's some comparisons. The problem is that Marshall had the most optimum advantage, not per game, but say this is his best season and just accept the numbers as being epically productive. He was doing it being limited or ceding more of the receiving work to a first-year freshman than most of the other players we're trying to compare him to were doing at age 19 as the second and third options on their team. I don't think this is doing it, is it? I really encourage you to look through the numbers, because there is a case. Again, this is an amazing season for Terrence Marshall. It's just happening, not this one, this last one. Right here. This is a good season. It's just that most players have a good season their senior year because of senior difference. That's what happens. You gradually become more productive as you play. They pretty much all do. But I'm not sure. I tell you what. This is what comes to mind. Compare it to something we just have readily to mind. Denver, 2020. Tim Patrick has a larger dominator than Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton. Now, obviously, there's more going on here. Tim Patrick is an undrafted free agent. He's playing at a more advanced age. He's 27 years old. He doesn't have dynasty value in that blah, 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 blah. But you can also see Cortland Sutton per game, bruh, and Jerry Jeudy as a rookie, right? This is pretty much Terrence Marshall versus that Buttle guy and with Tim Patrick and Jerry Jeudy. Jerry Jeudy looks more impressive because this is his first season in the NFL, getting a fairly similar dominator rating in the same way that Terrence Marshall and Buttle were getting a similar market share of receiving yards last year in 2020. Yes, Tim Patrick's the dominant force in this offense, but the one that catches my eye isn't Tim Patrick. And Cortland Sutton would be the argument for per game, sure, but we actually have more information about Tim's Cortland Sutton. We saw him play last year in this situation when he was a more dominant force in his rookie year. Both Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton have a positive note in that they were more dominant compared to most players earlier in their NFL career than Tim Patrick ever was. And yes, it's an entirely different animal because Tim Patrick was undrafted, and I'm a big fan of undrafted free agents. This is not Tim Patrick shade. I'm trying to draw an illustration to why Terrence Marshall's profile looks bad. It's not, I will change the numbers on a per game basis. It's because when he was doing it and how he was doing it is less impressive than most players that go on to do well. In fact, if we look at Tim Patrick's, I think I've looked at this before, and I'm pretty sure. Oh, that's nothing. Don't forget you saw my windows pop up. Patrick. This pretty much looks like Terrence Marshall's career. 7-11, 34% in terms of receiving yards. This is a dominator, but again, it's an illustration, not an exact comparison, because it's an entirely different animal, because it's the NFL, and we've got draft capital involved, and everything else. But that's actually pretty similar numbers. And also, if we just go to 2020 as an example, Tim Patrick has got a 34% dominator there, right? What if I told you, because I happen to know this number off my top of my head, that wide receivers in the top 12, for example, less than or equal top 12, have about a 40% dominator on average. That's got running backs in there. There are the top 12 players' dominator ratings in the NFL. So once you compare it to that, you see that Tim Patrick's production wasn't particularly great. And also you played fantasy last year, I'm assuming, so you know it wasn't that great. But that's what we're doing with Terrence Marshall. It's not that Tim Patrick didn't have a good season. It's not that Terrence Marshall is Tim Patrick. That's not the comparison I'm making here. I'm pointing out that his numbers are bad. That's not to say there isn't a path to arguing that he's good, but it's going to have to come from somewhere else. That last season, okay, it was pretty decent, but even then it's his last season at age 20, and someone else, he's ceding work to a freshman. Again, it might be that freshman is the next Megatron for all I know, but as we know, and as I've pointed out in this video alone, players who are good in the same team tend to dominate a bit more than most. And that's not what we saw that last season with Terrence Marshall. His numbers don't compare well. There's some hope there. As someone who, analytics nerd, I write them off because they're not above their line. That's not what I'm doing. I want to know if he's good. So what I need to know is if there's some other factors. It's not please look through them yourself. Obviously, I'm not saying I'm an authority, but if you're talking to me with them, you should probably know that I dig through them a lot in any way I can because I don't want to be wrong. And Terrence Marshall was less productive than all the players who've been good in the NFL in college that weren't running backs, wide receivers, or DK Metcalf because he only played a limited number of games. DK Metcalf's production is higher than Terrence Marshall's once you take into the situation of when he was injured and when he was getting what numbers by comparison. He's closer to that line in his age 19 season than Terrence Marshall is in his age 20 season, even if you... So there's no need to adjust it per game in that sense. He's higher up. Just higher up. So what I need to know is other information. The way I might be getting him wrong is if... I don't know. But it's going to have to come from some information than his actual production. Is Buttle just extremely good? That tells me that 23% and 20% market share receiving yards is less of a concern because they're just sharing it. It is slightly more of a concern because he's older. And then it's compared to what? I have 5 prospects that just full on were definitely better in college. Doesn't mean they're going to be better in the NFL, which is why I don't want to get him wrong. But again... It's not in his numbers. It's not in his production. And you can't adjust them per game it. Conference adjust it. Alabama adjust it. 2020 adjust it. No matter how, it doesn't work. We can't get him there. He wasn't productive. He wasn't. The numbers aren't the numbers that you want. The sky is blue. Also, by the way. Could it be not telling us that he's good when he's actually good? Yes. But with a profile like Marshall, you're going to have to lean on, I'm seeing more on the field than is turning up in his numbers. That's not because he's sharing the field with Buttle, and because we've seen that happen, and that's not normally what happens to a Terrence Marshall if he's above average and can elevate to the NFL level. It's not. So it's going to have to be something else. And I don't know. That's not... If this is what I've got. I need some other reason. It's not, oh, but the other players, I've looked. Nope. It's not per game. I've looked. No. It's not any of those. It's not. I wish I had a better conclusion. If he's good, I want to know. Here are some names you should know if you want to argue for Terrence Marshall. Brandon Marshall. He's someone that fits within our window of 2000 and now. We saw his full college season play out. In his last year, he got a 40% dominator. That's why I'm paying attention to Terrence Marshall's last year. Those who do have are late breakouts and then good in the NFL, they tend to be exponentially productive that last year. That's why I'm concerned about that 30% dominator. Even with 40% of the receiving touchdowns, it tends to creep over that 40%. In my ranks for this year, I have players above Terrence Marshall without the little red. I put their names in red if there's really a big problem on their profile, if you haven't seen my ranks. And they're not in red, but they have that late breakout nature as Terrence Marshall. And the reason is because they were epically, adjusted by conference, productive and dominated market share receiving that last year. And so they trigger an old, well, we've seen that happen a couple of times. And Marshall doesn't get there. That 30 whatever percent, that 33% that you adjust it if you go per game or project the rest of his season as if it would continue on exactly as it was, it doesn't get into that range. So, but Brandon Marshall's a possibility. Now, Brandon Marshall, I don't know from his college. I wasn't paying attention. I know from his NFL coverage, and also personal interviews he had with him, he had issues. Growing up, fitting into situations, chemistry with the team. I'm throwing out possible things that if that sounds like Terrence Marshall, there's a Brandon Marshall comparison to make. That's the only one I know of. There are some other late breakout players, but most of them show up in some other significant ways. I know of very few late breakout players. In fact, I wrote an article about all of them because, again, I spend more time looking at these guys than any other guys, and that's the only one. That's the only type of reason I can think. Was Marshall distracted? It was a COVID year. I don't want to hear horrible stories about what he was going through, but that would make me go, okay, well, yeah, we've got a Brandon Marshall potential. I hope it's something else, but I mean, that's a route I would take if you wanted to argue for Marshall. One, you can tell me all about his takes. I can't get access to any about that. You can say he does this on tape, he does that on tape. He's huge, he pushes players out the way, and I'll be like, cool. Because I don't know that. The numbers don't tell me that. They don't tell me how he plays. They don't tell me the manner in which he's producing. They just tell me how he compares to past prospects. And the only fair way to do that is compare them across metrics and statistics that actually seem to have connection to how well players do in the NFL, not height and weight, which don't. He does have some physical comparisons, I imagine, that are also positive. So that tells us about his physical ability, which is important. But if we want to talk about his production and his path to the NFL, we have to make some reasonable comparison to successful players. And it's not in his production. It's just not. If he's good, if he turns out to be the best prospect in this class, which I fully admit could be true, because anything can be true and we don't know the future, the signal's somewhere else or there's no signal. And that's okay, because sometimes we just don't see it coming. But that's when you're betting on. yeah. I started out this very toxic, I know, at the start, because it's really frustrating to be told the numbers aren't the numbers, you're just not looking at them hard enough. Bruh, I promise you I've looked. Maybe and it's their pin. If you want to go look and prove, like, I miss a lot of stuff. I'm working hard, I look a lot, but maybe I've missed something. Sure. But these are the things that I've looked at, and then some. I've looked at specifically at his career, through this method, not through 40 minutes, but like a lot longer, across all his statistics, not just his market share. Oh, you just care about I want to know if he's good, bruh. I don't want to not draft him. So believe me, I've ground. And I would advise you to grind too, because maybe I can easily miss something. I'm a moron. But it's not because I haven't looked. And if you want to look at market share, if you want to pick a per team attempt, if you want to go per game, even though I say you shouldn't, his numbers are bad. His per game numbers are bad. So that's not the answer. Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson aren't excuses, because when we've seen that happen, his numbers are bad compared to them. His numbers are bad. I'm out. That's it. I'm out. I want to know if he's good, but these arguments don't work. Not if we want a positive comparison. I mean, we don't need one. He'll get draft capital and we can draft him on the basis of that. So that will be your argument. That would be the reason to draft him. That's it. As far as I know, and I want to hear more. Like, I'm going to talk to Zach Reed soon about what he sees on tape. So hopefully he can enliven me with the amazing football moves he makes on tape, and how the way he moves his body only really compares to Megatron, at least. If he says something like that, I'll be like, wow, that's great. I can't see that in numbers, and I believe you. I believe that's what you see. So I will come down on my negativity on him. But those are the paths. It's not his production. It's just not there. Anyway, I'm out. Hope that was entertaining for some of it, I guess. I don't know. It's just something I had to get off my chest, I guess. When I say a player isn't productive, I know it sounds like just a tropey statement, and I want you to go and check, but don't just throw out random ideas, because I've probably looked at them. And when I say not productive, like, I mean that. I mean all of those ideas that you've just thrown at me. Sorry. I hope he's good. I really do. I want them all to be good. I love watching good players. I want him to be another one. Tell me why. See you later. Bye.
Do you have the time?